So I see people starting to join. I first want to welcome you all for being here with us this evening. We're also going to get started in about a minute or so. I want to give as many people the opportunity to join the webinar as they can before we officially get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Faith Odom, and I serve as the Assistant Director on the Alumni Engagement and Initiatives team. Welcome to our Alumni Insights webinar. With this series of virtual webinars, we seek to provide education on general topics related to the college application process. I want to take a moment to encourage each of you to be engaged during this webinar and ask questions as they may arise, and we'll get to them as they roll in. Tonight, we are joined by Women Married alumnus Matt Essman, class of 99, Director of College Counseling. Yes, I was to make sure I'm saying this right. Director of College Counseling for Marriott Institute and St. Louis Country Day School. Over his 25-year career, he has worked in both university admissions and college counseling. Having supported students on both sides of the college application process, Matt is well knowledgeable and fully equipped to guide us on the topic of preparing juniors. I will now turn the webinar over to the hands of our presenter, Matt.
All right, great. Faye, thank you so much to you and the alumni office. It's great to re-engage with my alma mater, doing something that I love, which is talking about the college admission process. It's something I've been doing for 25 years. There were so many points along the way where I wanted to be more engaged with William and Mary because of my background. But working in university admissions, working in high school counseling, I always felt like it was a conflict of interest to represent at college fairs or do alumni interviews or any of that stuff. And so it's great to be able to connect in this way. And I'm excited to talk to you all out there tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Please know that at the end of my presentation tonight, I'm going to provide my contact information. If you have any specific questions about your family situation, your child, their process, I would hope that you would feel free to reach out to me at any point. I love talking about this stuff. I want to be as helpful as I can. And so while tonight my goal is to try to touch on a pretty wide array of topics that I think students, particularly at this point in the 11th grade, as they're looking ahead to the summer and into the fall and applying to school, I'm going to touch on a lot of pertinent topics. But if there are any specific questions about your situation, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'm always want to be as helpful as I can. And like I said, I just love assisting families that are going through this process. So I am going to share my screen here and there we go. And we are off and running. Again, welcome to this program. I'm delighted to be here. I work at MICDS, which is a co-educational private institution in suburban St. Louis. We've got about 1,250 students, kindergarten through 12th grade. I'm the director of college counseling here. I've got 3 other wonderful colleagues that serve as college counselors that I work with. Before we get going, I wanted to share this quote from Frank Bruni. Frank Bruni is a New York Times columnist who wrote a book back in 2015, I believe, called Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be. And the subtitle of the book was actually An Antidote to the College Admissions Mania, I believe. And as relevant as that was in 2015, I think it's even more relevant today. And I want this to always be what guides me in my work with students. I think this quote in particular sums up my personal philosophy and really what I believe to be at the heart of this process, which is choosing the right college is about finding the best environment where you can thrive and grow. That's really what we should all aspire for college for either ourselves or for our kids. I know we may have students on the webinar as well. This should be front and center in everything that we do as it relates to this process, right? What is the right place for me? What is the place where I can thrive and grow and learn about myself and discover what it is that I'm going to be doing in my life after college? And so I think Frank Bruni's words from nearly 10 years ago are even more important today, as this landscape of college admission has really gotten more and more challenging. It's gotten more unpredictable. It's gotten more difficult for students. It's gotten to be more work. And so I think even now more than ever, it's important for students to, again, find that place that is the right fit for them. Wanted to give you all just a little bit of an overview of my background. So my career in admission, I guess we could say, began the summer of 1998. I was living in Williamsburg off campus for the summer with 3 fraternity brothers. I had a job during the day for the William & Mary admission office, giving campus tours, as well as doing data entry from mail-in cards that students would send in to get on the mailing list. And there, right there, we can point out one way this process has really changed. We don't do a lot with mail-in cards anymore. Everything's obviously done online. But doing data entry and giving campus tours, and I just fell in love with the work. I stayed on with the office as an intern through my senior year. And one of the admission officers at William & Mary, when I was a senior, that I did a lot of work for, was an alum of Grinnell College in Iowa. And that's how I first heard about that school. And she encouraged me to apply for an opening that they had. I'm a native Midwesterner from St. Louis. And so spent 3 years as an admission counselor at Grinnell College, went on to Bucknell University after that for 3 years, then on to Haverford College in suburban Philadelphia. At that point, I'd spent 10 years visiting high schools, reading applications, meeting with students, recruiting students, and decided I wanted to make the leap to high school counseling. And so living in Philadelphia at the time with my wife, moved over to an independent school in suburban Philadelphia called Episcopal Academy, spent 4 years as their director of college guidance before St. Louis kind of sucked me back home to be near family. I had my twin daughters who are now 11, were 1 at the time. And so it was a chance to come back and be near family. And so that's a little bit about my journey. Just kind of started kind of the basics, right? Let's talk about when we think about applying to college and the components of a college application, what are we talking about? I want to highlight kind of the 2 main application avenues that students will take as they're thinking about applying to college in the fall. One is what we call the Common Application. And again, it's maybe something many of you are familiar with, but the Common Application has almost 1,100 member institutions now. And here at my school, and probably the same for many of you at your schools, it is the application that our students use for, I would say, it's about 96% of the applications that they submit each year. It covers a wider range of institutions. It used to be primarily private institutions, and in the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen huge growth in public universities, public institutions that are using the Common App. And so now just about every student that I work with is applying with the Common Application. Other than that, you will still have institutions that still have their own institutional application. Generally ask for a lot of the same information you're going to find on the Common Application. But again, some schools are still using their own institutional application, or some public university systems. The University of California Public University System, for example, they have their own UC, University of California application that you use to apply to any of those schools. And so those are kind of the main applications that students are using these days. And what are those applications asking for? Certainly a lot of demographic information. When students think about filling out an application, often they think it's a lot more work, the application itself, than it is. It's a pretty straightforward process. Now it's online. They are prompted to answer questions. In a lot of instances, they're choosing from drop-down box menus to answer questions. And so it's pretty straightforward. So a lot of demographic information. The 2 elements of the application that do take the most kind of work and creative thought on the part of the student are, number 1, their activities list, right? In the limited space that the application provides, they are to represent their extracurricular activities, involvements at school, involvements outside of school, jobs, travel, all of those things kind of fall under the large umbrella of the activities list. And so that takes a little bit of thought, although they're pretty limited in the characters that they can use in those spaces. But again, you've got that, and then you've got the personal statement. A lot of people, refer to it as the college essay. I still call it a personal statement because that is what it is, and that's how it's defined by the Common Application, and really is to direct a student to use that space to share more information about themselves, and especially information that maybe can't be found in other aspects of their application. So those are the three main parts of the student component of an application, right? What is the student is responsible for filling out? Certainly paying an application fee or asking the school requesting an application fee waiver. Those generally application fees are varying anywhere from about $50 to $100 per institution these days. And so depending on a student's financial situation, many schools, if you ask, will grant you a fee waiver, so you don't have to pay those application fees. An official transcript. We all know what this is: a record of your academic performance and courses from the beginning of ninth grade through the time you apply to college. So certainly if you're applying early in the fall, that's going to include, 6 semesters, 9th through 11th grade. If you apply a little later in the fall, it may include your first semester grades. And that's something you should ask your school or counselor's office about if you're curious. Most schools should be willing to share a transcript with you if you are curious about what that looks like, and see what that says. It'll have a grade point average on there, if your school provides that. Class rank, if your school still ranks students, that will usually be on there. And usually, I would say most high schools have what they call a high school profile. And that high school profile is a general kind of information sheet that's usually a couple of pages that is kind of information about the school, course offerings, college going kind of results over the past 3 to 5 years of their students. Usually maybe it has standardized testing information, maybe district-wide information. So that is information that is on a high school profile, and a high school profile is usually sent along with every single application that a student files to college. Letters of recommendation from a counselor, from teachers, right? So you will have folks who may be writing on your behalf as part of your application process. The next 3 of these, you'll see they're italicized because some of this may apply to you and some of this may not. Standardized test scores, I will dig a little deeper into this later on. We're in a kind of test optional world right now, and still are, although we're starting to see some slight shift back to schools requiring standardized testing. But if those are part of the process, that's information that you will supply when you apply. Supplemental essays. So the Common Application, what's great about it is you fill it out one time, and if you're applying to 5, 10, 12 more schools that are part of the Common Application, right, you just fill this application out one time and you can send it to all of those schools, right? They accept it as if it were their own application. However, we are increasingly seeing schools that are asking for supplemental information just for them. And really kind of a general rule of thumb is that the more selective an institution, they seem to ask you to jump through more hoops to apply to them. Meaning, okay, we've got your Common Application. We want you to answer an extra essay question. We want you to answer a couple of extra essay questions or answer some of these short answer questions. Some schools have gotten really creative in what they're asking for. Wake Forest University asks students for their, give us your top 10 list. And it's really kind of that open-ended. So, they're trying to use this to get at a couple of things, but usually most importantly, what it is about their institution that you're drawn to and why you're applying to their school, right? That's a big piece of information they're generally trying to get from these supplemental essays or supplemental questions that they're asking. And then portfolio for students that are looking at programs in the arts, there may be a portfolio required. All right. So let's talk about general timelines, right? When do you apply? So regular decision is kind of what we all know. This is the early January deadline that's existed, as long as we can remember. When I applied to William and Mary, The idea of early decision was not kind of widely utilized by students. And so, as probably many of my classmates did as well, we applied to a handful of schools that had a January 1st deadline. We got the decision back by the 1st of April, and we had a month to decide where we wanted to go, May 1st. And that general timeline still exists, right? All schools will have a deadline, a regular decision deadline that's sometime between early January and the middle of February. What we have seen really an increase in is these earlier deadlines, right? So let's talk about those. Early decision. Early decision, by definition, is a binding commitment. If you apply early decision to an institution, you are indicating to that school that if admitted, you will attend. And you actually have to sign an early decision agreement. You, the student, the parent, and your school counselor actually sign an agreement form attesting that you understand that by applying early decision, if you are admitted, you will withdraw any other applications that you've submitted and that you will be enrolling in that institution. It's a big decision. It is a big commitment. It's something that you shouldn't take lightly, but it is something that is utilized by a number of particularly private institutions. Okay, so that is early decision. And generally, deadlines for early decision fall in early or mid-November, for the most part. Some institutions actually offer a second early decision deadline, early decision round 2. Again, that's an early January deadline. So I have worked with students that may apply early decision to an institution, not be admitted, and then they can turn around a month later and essentially apply early decision again to another institution. Okay, again, all the same rules apply. You've got to fill out that early decision agreement. And as you can imagine, right, you can only apply to one institution early decision. You only get to tell one school that you will absolutely attend if admitted. Okay, so that's early decision. Where we've really seen a lot of growth is in early action. Early action is non-binding, right? But it is an earlier deadline yielding to an earlier admission decision. Okay, and so this is an area that I really encourage students, if they are looking at schools that offer this, if you can meet this deadline, I think it is really valuable. And where I think it's valuable is it's not necessarily increasing your admission chances because you're not making that commitment to attend. But what it does is for schools that offer early action, and usually those deadlines begin in mid-October and run through December, they're usually providing you an admission decision by January, let's say, maybe even February. But what that does is it's creating a bigger window in the back end for you to decide of the schools where you've been admitted where you'd like to go. And so as I tell students, number one, there's a lot more to senior year than just applying to college. I know that is a heavy emphasis, certainly in the fall for students, but there's a lot more to enjoy and love about being a senior in high school than just applying to college. And so any of the work that you can kind of front load earlier in the year and get those applications out the door, I highly recommend it. And I will tell you that here we've got a graduating class of about 150 to 160 students. And by November 1st every year, they've probably submitted almost 900 applications, okay, across those 150 to 160 students, because they're applying to 3, 4, 5 schools under an early action plan. They want to get those applications out the door, and we're encouraging them to work on their application over the summer. And so those that are diligent about that and can meet those early deadlines, I think they find that to be very valuable. Within early action, there are one of the things you're going to learn about the college admission process is there's never a straightforward answer, right? It depends is the most common answer I give to families that ask questions about different elements of this process. So even within early action, we've got different types of early action. We've got restrictive, we've got single choice. Usually what that means is you can't apply to other institutions early action, or for private schools that have restrictive early action, it means you can't apply to other private universities early action, but you can't apply to public universities. So make sure you kind of know what the rules are, and they should be very clearly outlined within a college's website or on the Common Application. You get that information, should be right there. Priority is another term used particularly by public universities, same thing as early action. It is kind of an earlier deadline, happens sometime in the fall, and it usually means you're going to get your decision back sooner than April 1st, right? Which is the date by which a college has to notify you if you apply, in January. And then rolling admission. Rolling admission is an ongoing process. Usually what that means is that when you apply to an institution, if they have rolling admission, they're going to get you a decision back usually in 2 to 4 weeks, sometimes sooner than that. It's utilized by a lot of large volume public universities, although certainly some private schools I know use it as well. That is, usually there's a date that it opens for a lot of schools. It could be as early as, I'm seeing some schools even July now, but August or September. You go ahead and apply whenever, and they will make decisions until their spots are filled up. Okay. And so I usually tell students, right, if you're looking at schools that offer rolling admission here in my home state of Missouri, our University of Missouri public system, all of those schools are on rolling admission. Those deadlines open August 1st. We encourage students to apply early, and they tend to do that. So biggest advice I can give you here, meet those early deadlines, right? If you've got 4 or 5 schools on your list that have fall deadlines in November, and you can get the work done and apply, again, I think it's to your benefit to do that. The one thing I will say about early decision, because you are making the commitment to attend if admitted, we are generally talking about higher acceptance rates. Okay, I think that's fair to assume that the rate at which students are admitted in early decision is going to be higher than in regular decision. Okay, by and large, right? I worked at 3 highly selective private institutions. We utilized early decision. For us, the early decision students, applicants made up 50% of the enrolling class, right? Of the class that ended up coming to the school in the fall, half of those students came out of the early decision process. But the total application volume in early decision was 10 to 20% of the overall applications we ultimately received. So much smaller applicant pool, higher acceptance rate, about half the class. Again, that's going to vary from school to school, but that's a kind of a safe rule of thumb when it comes to those. Just checking. Yeah, so somebody asked in the chat about, can you get this information? Yeah, so there are a couple of different ways. Individual universities often will put out a profile of their first year class, incoming class, where they will break it down by admission type, right? What their acceptance rates are. Actually, later on in this webinar, I'm going to give you a website that I really like that actually breaks a lot of this information down as well. But all colleges actually have publicly available on their websites what we call kind of a common data set. It's a pretty dense document that's going to have data about admission, but also financial aid and current student enrollment and also housing, all sorts of different stuff. But there is a section in the common data set for every institution that is dedicated to admission information. And so that is also an area where you can often find that kind of information. So, all right, here we go. Quick little college admission humor for you. Got to throw in a little fun here while we're talking about college admissions. So I thought you'd enjoy my little cartoon. All right, so research. This is the conversation I'm having with my juniors and have been having now for the last couple months. It's like the next, 5, 6, 7 months, the emphasis should be on research. And obviously there are a lot of different ways to get information about colleges. Certainly the one we're all familiar with, we may have done ourselves when we were going through the process, we parents, in-person college visits, right? You register online through the college's admissions website. You go show up on campus on your assigned day. You take a tour, usually lasts about an hour and a half, and you sit through a 45-minute or so information session, right? That's kind of the traditional college visit that has existed for a long time and still exists today. Certainly, the availability of information on websites gets better and better every year. I always caution students, though, please, to the degree that you can, get your information from the institution's own website. There are a lot of kind of third-party websites that are unaffiliated with any particular institution. that have information on there. I would be skeptical about those. Some are good, some not so great. I think the more information you can get directly from the institution about their programs, their offerings, the better off you'll be. One of the good things to come out of the pandemic during a time when visit opportunities were so limited or non-existent is that colleges really stepped up their game in terms of their virtual tours and programs. So you can take a virtual tour of just about any school now. They've got kids with GoPros that have filmed these tours, and you get a really good feel for the school from the comfort of your own, living room, watching on your laptop. A lot of schools are doing virtual programs, right? Log in and they're doing a virtual, maybe it's an admission session, maybe it's a presentation by their School of Engineering, maybe it's a presentation by their athletic department. So I think that one of the good things to come of the pandemic is colleges recognizing what more they could do to reach students, as opposed to the traditional students coming just to them. They have really tried to better inform of the wide array of offerings that they have through different virtual programs. And so taking advantage of those. Some of you may be at high schools where you have college admission officers that visit every fall or come and do a college fair. So again, that's a great way for you to go and find information out about a school without having to travel to the institution. Other local programs that a school may put on, obviously getting on school mailing lists and talking to alums and current students. All of these are great ways to get information about different colleges and universities. What I tell students all the time is, right, it's okay for November to come and you do not know exactly where you want to go to school. That is totally fine. All you're trying to do in the next 5 or 6 months is to learn what you need to learn about these different schools to decide whether you're interested in them enough to apply. Okay, that's all you're trying to decide by either November or January. Am I interested enough in the school to apply? You don't have to know for sure that it's the right school for you necessarily, right? That'll come with a visit after you get an admission decision. But getting whatever you need to do to get the information you need to determine, right? Does a college meet that threshold of, yes, it kind of checks off these boxes for me, and so I'm going to apply to that school. Okay, that's what you're trying to decide. Obviously, if you're thinking about applying early decision to an institution, that threshold gets a little higher, right? You would need to know with absolute certainty that is the school you would attend if admitted. I would obviously think it would be hard to make that decision without visiting a school in person. But really, one of the things that I was seeing pre-pandemic that continued through the pandemic was schools doing less, students doing less and less visiting on the front end, applying, and then visiting on the back end. Because by and large, right, showing interest in a school by visiting is not a factor that they are using in the admission process, right? They've got all these other ways, and I've got them listed here, to determine, right, other ways for you to show your interest in a school without necessarily setting foot on campus. So take advantage of those if you can. All right, so let's talk a little bit about standardized testing. We are now at a point where for schools that are asking for it, they have no preference, right? ACT or SAT, no preference, pick one. Obviously, we're starting to see some schools shift back to requiring testing. We've seen a number of kind of big name, highly selective private schools in the last 2 to 4 months that have announced they're going back to requiring standardized testing. We have a number of schools, many schools that are remaining test optional, and they truly mean it, right? They are test optional. So, if you choose to never take a standardized test, or you take it, but there are scores that you ultimately don't want to send to a school, that is totally fine. Okay. And then we've got schools that are test blind. The University of California public system is a huge example of this. They are test blind. They do not even accept test scores. So you can't even get that information to them if you want. That's a kind of an extreme example, right? There aren't a lot of schools in that box. Most of them are kind of sitting in that middle in that test optional place. Don't overdo it. I worked with a student one time that took the ACT 8 times. That's overdoing it. There are, lots of other facets of this process You know, my general recommendation around testing is 2 to 3 times at most. You know, once in the, you know, winter, spring of 11th grade, once again in kind of the early summer or late summer, depending on the test, and then another one if you want to do a third or final in the fall of senior year. But, you know, I really caution about starting too early, and I caution about going too late, and I caution about doing it too many times, right? There is kind of a ceiling. You know, the biggest improvements students tend to see is from the first to the second sitting. It tends to plateau after 2 and especially after 3. So Compass Education Group down at the bottom, I provide their website here. They are my favorite authority when it comes to, you want to see who's test optional, you want to see who's requiring testing, you want to find test score ranges for schools. Their Adam Ingersoll is their founder, CEO. I've had him here at my school to do presentations a few times. He's fantastic. They've got a great blog just tackling all sorts of different topics and discussions around standardized testing. If you're curious, they've got a great kind of guidebook, an online digital guidebook that could be really helpful. That has really become kind of my one-stop shop when I want to find out what different schools' score policies are, what their score ranges are. All right. There we go. Okay, so the SAT, for those who may some of you may know this, some of you may not. The SAT went through a massive change this past year, and the SAT that was offered nationally in March was the first offering of the new digital SAT. You know, as the pandemic and kind of this kind of lull in testing gave the College Board time to really think about their test, and I applaud them for taking some steps to really make a more student-friendly test. It is digital. You take it on your computer, right? You still go to a testing center like you always have, but you take your laptop, or the testing center may provide a laptop. It's adaptive, meaning that how you perform on the first section for both the English and reading and for the math determines whether you get a harder or easier section 2. It's the way that the GRE has been for a long time, has been adaptive. And so, you know, this makes a lot more sense for a student for whom standardized testing maybe isn't a strength of theirs, to sit there for a long time and take a test that gets increasingly more difficult. Doesn't make a lot of sense and doesn't give you a lot of good information. And so having an adaptive test that is somewhat responsive to students in tests based on how they're doing makes a lot of sense. Still scored on a traditional 1,600-point scale that we know. You've got two. You get an English score out of 800 and a math score out of 800. They've shortened the test, 2 hours and 15 minutes. It is significantly shorter. And by and large, colleges are super scoring, meaning that they're going to take the best score from verbal and math, even if they're from different tests, and put them together to create your highest score. And you get a significant amount more time per question compared to the ACT. And so, you know, I've watched in real time in my own population that has always been a little more heavily ACT here in the Midwest and here in St. Louis, a very quick shift to this new digital SAT. Yep, a lot of preference for it. Students seem to really like it in comparison. ACT is still paper and pencil, filling out a Scantron, filling out bubbles. It is scored on a 36-point scale. It's got 4 sections: English, math, reading, science. Each section, you get a score out of 36, and then you get a composite score, essentially an average of the 4 out of 36. It is 3 hours and 30 minutes compared to the 2 hours and 15 minutes of the SAT, so a fair amount longer. They still have an optional writing section. I will tell you, I'm now coming up on year 6. I think it's been 6 years since I've told a student that they need to take the optional writing section. You actually have to pay extra to take it. And I can't think of an institution that I'm aware of that I've worked with in quite some time that has required the ACT writing. So if you're taking the ACT, you're probably pretty safe not taking that optional writing section. I want to tackle a little bit about financial aid. I'm certainly not a financial aid officer. This is not kind of my background. I work with students in financial aid issues, but just wanted to kind of give you an overview of the different types of financial aid. Certainly, we have need-based assistance, grants, loans, work study. Grants are provided by either federal government or the institution. They do not have to be paid back. Loans, obviously we know loans have to be paid back, and work study is generally a component of a financial aid package, right? I think the expectation that a student work on campus to help fund their education if they need financial assistance is an expectation that all schools have. And so if you're applying for financial aid, the financial aid award that you will receive from institutions is usually going to have a component of each of these three things. That is need-based assistance, right? So that is, families that fill out the financial aid forms, and I'll get to the two big ones here in a minute. If it's determined that your family needs assistance to pay for college, this is what you can expect. Merit awards or scholarships are just what they sound like. They are based on either academic achievement or a particular talent that a student may possess that a college wants on their campus. Those are awarded by the institution, and those are usually have no tie to your family's financial situation, right? It's just straight based on you being identified through the applicant pool application process that you are a stellar student, or like I said, have a particular talent that they value, and so you can get awarded a scholarship there. Outside scholarships, there are a lot of scholarships that you can apply for outside of the institutions themselves. There are a lot of great websites where you can essentially kind of fill out an online profile, and they will send you outside scholarships that they will match to you based on what the information about yourself that you put in there. This can be a really tedious process. There's a wide array of outside scholarships in terms of value, dollar amount, also in terms of work. And so what I find that students wrestle with is kind of the cost benefit analysis of, okay, there's this outside scholarship that I think I could be a good candidate for that is asking me to write a 2-page essay, and the scholarship is for $500. And so in the grand scheme of the cost of college, right, for the student, is that worth it to them to go through the process of applying for that, knowing what the dollar amount is? And again, if that's something you're interested in, you can always reach out to me, and I can kind of point you to the direction of some good kind of scholarship central type websites or organizations where you can learn more about that. Quickly, need blind versus need aware, right? Schools are either need blind, usually more affluent schools that meet a high percentage or all the financial needs of their applicants, are need blind, meaning that they make their admission decisions without taking a student's financial situation into account. We're talking about a pretty small subset of schools that are in the financial position to be able to do this, but they do exist. There are a lot of those kind of highly selective, big name private schools that you've heard of. And they are in that luxury position of being able to make decisions without having to worry about a student's ability to pay for that education, knowing that they can meet the needs of all their students. Versus need aware, right? You're gonna have a lot more schools that fall into this bucket that have to take that into consideration along with everything else in a student's application when making their decisions. And if you apply for financial aid, right, they're going to have that information. They're going to know what your family can afford. They're going to know what their cost of attendance is, obviously. And so sometimes you may run into a situation where what a school awards you is less than your need, right? And we call that gapping. So all the schools are operating with the same information that they receive from the federal government if you fill out the FAFSA form. How they choose to award you, how they choose to kind of constitute your package, whether they meet your full need, that is going to vary from school to school. Okay, so just be aware that there is no standard method of awarding financial aid. Okay, there's only a standard method of applying for financial aid. So we've got the FAFSA. Any school you apply to, if you're applying for need-based assistance, is going to require that you fill out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. The free part of that is the most important thing. There are some websites out there masking as FAFSA websites that are asking you to pay money to fill it out. You do not need to pay for the FAFSA. So the FAFSA is for the awarding of federal and state aid, grants, loans, and scholarships. It should be available on October 1st. It went through some changes this past year. For those of you that were paying attention, we had some FAFSA delays this past year because of a kind of a 5-year overhaul of the FAFSA that finally went into effect this past fall. We had a major delay in the rollout of the FAFSA, so it wasn't available to students until late December, early January. And so that really caused delay in students filing that information, in colleges receiving that information, and ultimately awarding financial aid packages. I'm expecting things to be back to normal next year, back on a regular timeline, which means the FAFSA will be available on the 1st of October. You will file it ideally by the time you apply to schools, but they will all have a deadline by which you need to submit the FAFSA. Parents and students both in the new version have information that they have to fill out. So you are each what they call a contributor. Anybody who has to submit information on the FAFSA is called a contributor. So parent and student. They have an IRS data retrieval tool that imports your tax information from 2 years ago right into the FAFSA, right? So you don't have to take all the time to have that information on hand and fill it out. It'll pull it right out of the IRS database. What we used to call the expected family contribution, right? That's the number that was conveyed by the government to every institution, right? This is what you as a student, your family is expected to pay for college. This is what you can afford, essentially. They now call that the student aid index, right? And it just determines what's the student's ability to pay or amount of aid they can receive. And that's the information that'll be conveyed to colleges that you list on your FAFSA. The new version is much shorter, right? They've reduced the number of questions you have to answer in the FAFSA. You can list up to 20 schools on your FAFSA, colleges to receive your information. And they use a standard federal methodology that is utilized by the federal government. The other form that is used by about 300 mostly private and mostly highly selective institutions is called the CSS profile. It's produced by the College Board, the same folks that put out the SAT. You pay for it, $25 for the first school, $16 each additional school. Frankly, they're just trying to get deeper into your family's financial picture than the FAFSA does, right? The FAFSA is generally a snapshot of income. CSS profile is trying to get a more complete picture. So they're going to get into, in situations of parent separations or divorce, they're going to want non-custodial parent information, net worth of small family businesses, home equity can be a big factor, medical expenses. So again, when that information is taken into account, it can paint a very different picture than the federal methodology, which is, like I said, we're really just looking at family income. Quick thoughts about the personal statement, right? This is the one piece of the application that my students generally causes them kind of the most anxiety. It's because it's the one part of the application they have the most control over, right? You think about all those components of an application, right? Not a lot of it they have an effect on, right? Their transcript, kind of by the time they apply to college, it is what it is. They can't alter that in any way. Letters of recommendation, right? These folks teachers and counselors are gonna say great things about them in their letters, but the students don't see those. So this is the one piece of the application that they really have total control over. Maximum word limit for the common application personal statement is 650 words. It's about a page, right? Not very long. So what I tell students, don't try to do too much. Be your authentic self, right? Think about someone in the other end sitting down to read your application. They don't know you, and in a relatively short document and in a relatively short amount of time, they're trying to learn as much about you as possible. And so think about what you would want someone who doesn't know you to learn about you through your personal statement, okay? Whatever you choose to write about, you must be the focus, you the student, right? They're not interested in learning about, somebody who has had a big influence on your life. They want to learn about you. And so whatever you choose to write about, you need to be very authentic, like I said, and you must be the focus of the essay. Telling a good story, I think, is always a great way to go. I think utilizing storytelling to get your kind of message across is a great tool when it comes to the personal statement. The College Essay Guide is a great online resource. A lot of great examples and tools and tricks and recommendations for how to get started. I would recommend checking his website out. He's fantastic. I've seen him present at conferences. A lot of great stuff there. So really kind of the last big thing I want to hit on is, okay, so we're heading into the summer. what are my tips? Right? What should students be thinking about? Number one, get started early. This Friday here at my school, our last day of school is on Thursday. This Friday, we host 2 3-hour common application workshops for our juniors. Okay, before they kind of take off for all the different stuff they're going to do over the summer, we want them to fill out their common application heading into the summer. The common application is open and live right now. You create an account and you can begin filling it out. So, you know, we're going to have almost our entire junior class between those 2 common app workshops we do on Friday. I recommend as soon as your school gets out for the year, or your child's school getting out for the year, tackling the common application. That's something they can be working on over the summer. If others are assisting you, give them plenty of advance notice. If you ask teachers for recommendations, if you ask somebody to review a draft of a personal statement that you wrote, give them plenty of time to do so. Okay, be respectful of their time, be appreciative that they're assisting you, and give them plenty of time to help you with whatever it is that you need. Seeking other opinions is something we do in everything that we do in life, right? I certainly understand that, but stay true to yourself. You know, I think high school students, you know, the more opinions you get, you know, I think sometimes students kind of get themselves kind of twisted into knots thinking about how to approach this process or what schools to look at. Everyone's got an opinion about college, where they went, this process. You know, I think students need to figure out what it is they want in an institution. What are the 3, 4, 5 non-negotiables? And then stay true to that as they go through this process. Okay. Go back to that idea of finding the right fit. So what is going to make you happy about your college experience? Because ultimately that's what is going to lead to a more successful college experience. For some students, they thrive in a smaller environment with class sizes of 15 to 20, where it's very interactive with the professor. Some students, they're driven by a particular academic interest, and so that drives their college search. For other students, it's geography. For others, it's cost, right? There are a lot of different factors. Just make sure you're staying true to those factors. Looking for schools that are a good fit kind of falls into that same bucket. Staying organized, right? You know, whatever your system of organization is, utilize that in this process. If you don't have one, try to figure one out. Maybe it's keeping an Excel spreadsheet where you list schools and all the different pertinent information for each school that's important to you. When you visit a college, if you take a campus tour, you know, as soon as the tour is done, step off to the side and record a 1 or 2 minute voice note into your phone, just your immediate thoughts in the aftermath of that campus tour and your thoughts about that school. This is a big one, particularly for parents. Your students are going to be inundated, especially when the fall starts, with college talk, right? They talk about it amongst their friends. It seems like everybody who they run into asks them what they're thinking about college. And I see what it does to students, and kind of it raises their anxiety about the process a little bit. And so my advice to parents is, to the degree that you can, establish a weekly kind of college discussion time and stick to that schedule. Okay, so you set aside time as a family, 30 minutes a week, every other week, whatever works for you, but that's your college time. And as parents, you honor that time. And students, you come into that time knowing, okay, you need to be engaged in the conversation at that point. You know, I know what it's like. You're at school all day, and then maybe you have sports practice after school for 2 or 3 hours, or you're in the play, or you're working for the newspaper, and you come home at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, and you've got homework, and you walk in the door, and you get bombarded with college questions, right? And that does not usually lead to a positive, fruitful discussion. So having a weekly college discussion time, bi-weekly, whatever works for you, and then everybody honoring it, I think is good. For parents, if finances are going to play a role in your child's college search, make that a part of your conversation now. Okay, I've just seen instances where parents have not made that clear to their children early on in the process. They've gone through, and then kind of pretty late in the process, they introduce that, and all of a sudden it's kind of gets too late for students to pivot. So if that's going to be a big part of your process, be open with your children about that now. And just know that everything you need to complete college applications is available to you now. You know, there's a reason that we're doing these workshops with our students before we head off for summer, is because it's available, and we want them to be thinking about it. Also, we want them to realize that in their mind, the idea of filling out the application seems daunting, but when they actually get down to it, the process of filling it out, like I said earlier, is pretty straightforward. And so the sooner they can kind of grasp that, I think they will just make them feel a little more at ease about the process of applying to college. And like I said, that's my information. I've been at this for 25 years in a variety of institutions and different capacities. I love assisting students and parents through this process. If at any point you think I could be helpful to you, if you have questions specifically about your child, all 3 colleges I worked for, I was heavily involved in the work that the admission office did with the athletic department. So I've been working with student athletes for all my life, all my career. So please, if I can be helpful, I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. So that's it. Pushing up on my hour here, so I will stop. Faith, did I miss any questions? Anything in the chat that I will?
Yeah, so we had 3 questions.
Okay.
We can start with the first one.
Sure.
It reads, been reading a little about GPA inflation. How do we separate our children when many kids have at or near a 4.0 GPA?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And grade inflation's a thing. I mean, I think that you can read articles about trends in high school grades and kind of where they've gone. One of the important things to remember is that your child is going to be read in the context of their high school. That's a really important thing to remember, right? And so schools have different grading systems. Weighted grades are, if a school chooses to weight grades, there's no systematic way of doing it. You can weigh it as much or as little as possible. When I worked at Bucknell, I recruited in Connecticut. When it was one of the areas where I visited, and the public high schools there were on a 18-point scale. So I'd have students with like a 17.2 GPA. I mean, right. So most colleges have an internal method of kind of recalculating GPAs. What they're going to do is they're going to take the grades off the transcript and feed them kind of into their own internal way of recalculating a GPA. But just know that, your student, the expectation of what your student has done is going to be based on what their high school has to offer, right? If you're at a school that doesn't offer advanced placement classes, your child is not going to be penalized for not taking an advanced placement class. And that's where that high school profile really plays an important role, because it has a lot of information about your specific high school that'll be conveyed to admission officers. So they have that context while they're reading your application. Now, they will very fairly compare your student to the other students who apply from their high school, right? And I think that is fair, but they're not going to do a lot of cross comparison to students from different schools just because you have wildly different offerings from school to school. Okay. I've seen elsewhere that many selective schools accept recruited athletes through their early decision process. Yeah, it depends on the institution, right? If we're talking about Division I or Division II, that largely are have students sign letters of intent and are scholarship awarding institutions, that is less so the case. I will tell you that particularly when it comes to highly selective Division III schools, because Division III schools are not do not award athletic scholarships. And they don't do letter of intent, right? The only way that they know a student is interested is if they're willing to apply early decision, right? So they can say, hey, I want you to be one of my ex recruits for my team. But for it to work, you've got to apply early decision. And so, right, I worked at 2 highly selective Division III schools where we did heavily utilize early decision for recruited student athletes. I would say that it didn't have an overall effect on the other decisions that we made. We budgeted for that essentially internally. We knew that we were going to bring in kind of X number of students to that part of the process. And so, again, I would say that is more of a thing at particularly highly selective Division III institutions than anywhere else. Yeah, so if you score well in your first round of the SAT, do you recommend stopping or should you take it again just to see? It's a great question. And it does depend student to student, right? Some students hit a score early on that they've got a goal in mind, they hit that, and mentally they kind of shut off. Totally fine with that. One of the things that we need to keep in mind is that in this test optional world that we are living in, because let's recognize that, say, only 50% of students that apply to an institution may be submitting test scores, we can pretty much assume that the ones who are submitting test scores are the ones that are really happy with their test scores. And so it has artificially kind of inflated test score averages at test optional institutions, because you've got this whole 50% of scores that would probably bring that average down a little bit that isn't represented. So keep that in mind when you're looking at test score ranges for schools. But if you are in or near a range, I'm generally recommending that you submit. Again, it depends on how close you are, you know, that kind of that score that a student wanted to hit. It may make sense to take it again. There's kind of no harm, no foul from a would it hurt me to take it again if the score goes down? No. Right? That's an important thing to remember. But I work with students that are one and done all the time, and good for them. Yeah, this is a great question, right? Since the affirmative action decision. Oh, go ahead, Faith. You want to jump in?
Oh no, I was just gonna kind of move them along. You go, you're the expert.
Okay, yeah. So right. So you know, since the Supreme Court decision, you know, that information, that demographic information in the common application or the college application is suppressed, right? So colleges are not getting that information, but there are certainly other ways for students to convey that diverse experience they have or their background. Certainly, the personal statement is a great kind of open forum for them to highlight that. They might be involved in organizations or groups where in the description of and listing of that in their student activities list, that's also a good place for that to come out. I would say that, again, because those are the two elements of the application that allow for the most kind of original creation by the student, those are the two best avenues for them to convey that type of information. Yep. Yeah, great question. Comparing year over year. No, colleges generally have kind of what I call, you know, pretty short attention spans. You know, and every year's a new year. And even what we're seeing on the admissions side, right? The increase in applications, particularly at highly selective schools, is going up significantly year over year. I think we're finally steadying, thankfully. But there were a couple of years there through the pandemic where, you know, schools that were admitting single-digit percentage of their applications were still seeing double-digit increases in applicants. And so, you know, I think it's getting harder for them to kind of do those cross-year comparisons. They really are focused on that year. So I think there's less of that going on than people think. Yeah, great questions.
Well, it seems like we answered them all. We'll give it a few more seconds to see if any final questions are going to roll in before we wrap it up.
Sure. And I meant what I said, right? I've got a day job here working for a school, but you know, please don't ever hesitate to contact me if I could be helpful to you. I'm more than happy to. I'm pretty quick on my email. You've got my phone number. That's my direct office line. Call or email anytime. I work in my office all summer, not a whole lot to do. So feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Okay, so I'm going to put this link here, but then I will go ahead and wrap it up. First, I want to thank you, Matt, for your expertise today, your participation. We really appreciate it. This was a great webinar. Thankfully, we're recording it, so we have our participants here tonight, but many, many more alumni, their family and friends will be able to learn from this webinar.
Great.
I also want to thank our participants today for coming. Please be sure to keep a lookout for emails regarding the rest of the sessions we have. We have one more coming up this semester. On June 10th, we will discuss the college interview process just in time for Admission Insights Weekend, which you can find at the link that I put in the chat. Please, registration is open, so if you want to come back to campus for in-person sessions, bring your children on campus. We are ready to accept you. Also at the link, you can find previous webinars that we've done over the course of this spring semester, but also the fall semester. And that is it for today's session. Matt, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Faith. And if any of my fellow class of 99 alums are on here, I hope to see some of you all at our 25th in October.